Imagine losing everything overnight. Your goods, your health, your family, everything crumbling before your eyes without explanation. How would you react? Most of us would come into despair, questioning why so much suffering. But there was a man who faced this reality and remained firm. His name? Job. Job's story is not just a report of tragedy, but a true test of faith that challenges our understanding of God and suffering. If God is just, why do you allow good people to suffer? What's more, does our faith depend on the blessings we receive or the God we believe in? These questions are in the heart of Job's incredible journey. Throughout this video, you will understand how Job dealt with his pain, how his friends tried to interpret his situation, and especially what was God's surprising answer to this dilemma. Get ready for a story that will challenge your vision of faith, perseverance, and divine justice. Stay with me until the end, because the last part of this story can completely change the way you view life trials. Job was a prosperous man, respected and faithful to God. His life seemed perfect, a great family, many riches, and a flawless reputation. But suddenly, everything changed. In a short time, he lost his children, his goods, and even his health. Such a turnaround that anyone would wonder, why? This story shows us that true faith does not depend on favorable circumstances, but unshakable trust in God. Job's pain was not small. Imagine yourself in his place, losing all children at once, seeing their goods destroyed, and, as if that were not enough, being hit by a terrible disease. His body was covered with painful wounds, to the point that he sit on ashes and shave the skin with ceramic shards. Who would support all this without revolt? However, instead of cursing God, Job kept his stance of humility and faith. Job's suffering was so intense that even his wife, unable to see so much pain, suggested that he curse God and die. But Job responded with a phrase that echoes to this day: will we receive good from God and will not receive evil? Job 210. 8-we moment reveals something powerful. Faith is not an exchange of favors with God, but a commitment that resists even in the worst moments. Job teaches us that trust in God cannot be based only on good times. This is the type of trial that puts anyone to the test. How do we react when everything goes wrong? When do we lose what we love the most? Job shows us that true faith is not measured by what we have, but from what we remain when everything is taken us. But is this story just about suffering? Or is there a greater purpose behind this pain? Job was not any man. The Bible itself describes it as righteous and fear of God, someone who diverted evil. He was not only rich in goods, but also in character. Unlike many, his prosperity did not make him arrogant or distant from God. On the contrary, he lived in constant worship, interceded for his children, and kept a life of righteousness. Job teaches us that true wealth is not what we have, but in the way we live before God. But this integrity has not gone unnoticed. In the spirit world, Satan questioned Job's faithfulness, implying that he was only faithful because he had a blessed life. Take everything he has and see if he won't curse you on your face, the accuser challenged. This detail is crucial. The true test of faith does not happen when everything goes well, but when the floor disappears under our feet. Have you ever wondered if your faith would resist such proof? Even after losing everything, Job kept his posture firm. In the midst of the ashes, instead of revolting, he did something surprising. The Lord is given, the Lord took, blessed be the name of the Lord. Job 121. This completely challenges human logic. While many move away from God in the face of difficulties, Job remained faithful. Does your story invite us to reflect? Is our faith based on God or the blessings he gives us? Job's integrity teaches us a valuable lesson. Faithfulness to God cannot be conditional. Many times, we can only see meaning in what brings us comfort, but Job reminds us that God remains God, even in difficult times. But if Job didn't sin, then why did you suffer so much? Was there really a purpose behind your pain? Job's suffering was not a chance. Behind the scenes of his story, an intense conversation happened between God and Satan. The enemy questioned Job's faith, suggesting that he was only faithful because he lived a prosperous and difficult life. Satan did not believe that anyone could love God without receiving something in return. And then a challenge was launched: if Job lost everything, would he keep loving? Is this a question that echoes to this day? Does our faith resist without rewards? God allowed Job to be tested, but with a limit. Satan could touch his goods, his family, and even his health, but not in his life. This detail is important. God never loses control, even amid trials. The enemy can act, but always within the limits established by God himself. This reminds us that, as much as we face struggles, nothing happens without God allows. But why? What is the purpose of this? The devil thought Job would give in to despair, but was wrong. Even after losing everything, Job did not blaspheme. On the contrary, he continued to recognize God's sovereignty. This must have been a hard blow to Satan. He wanted to destroy Job's faith, but instead ended up witnessing an even deeper worship. This teaches us something powerful: trial does not destroy true faith, it strengthens it. This story makes us reflect on how we deal with our difficulties. Many times when something goes wrong, we tend to move away from God or to doubt his love. But what if, in fact, proof is an opportunity to grow spiritually? Job shows us that even without answers, it is possible to remain firm. But not everyone thought so. Their own friends came with theories to explain their suffering. Were they right? When Job lost everything, his friends Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar came back him. In the beginning, they seemed solidarity. They spent 7 days and 7 nights in silence, just sharing their pain. But when they started talking, things changed. Instead of offering support, they came to accuse him. According to them, Job could only be suffering because he had sinned against God. After all, in their logic, God blesses the righteous and punishes the wicked. But are things that simple? Eliphaz was the first to speak and suggested that Job would accept his guilt. For him, no one suffers for no reason. Bildad reinforced this idea, saying that Job's children probably died because of their own sins. Zophar was even harder. He said Job deserved something worse than he was going on. The problem of this approach? They were trying to fit suffering within a human explanation, ignoring that God acts much greater than we can understand. Job, on the other hand, did not accept these accusations. He knew he had not committed any serious sin to justify so much disgrace. Instead of blaming himself, he questioned God, seeking answers. And this is an interesting point. Job did not pretend to be well, did not chew his pain. He expressed himself sincerely, showing that having faith does not mean hiding feelings. God is not offended when we question, for he knows our hearts. But were your friends completely wrong? Many people still believe that suffering is always a direct consequence of something we have done. But Job's story proves that this is not always true. God allows certain trials not as punishment, but as part of a larger plan. But Job didn't know that yet. He just wanted to understand why all that was happening. And when God finally answered, it was surprisingly. After long dialogues, questions, and frustrated attempts to understand his suffering, Job finally received a response from God. But it did not come in the form of detailed explanations or human justifications. God spoke to Job in the middle of a whirlwind, revealing his sovereignty and power. Instead of responding directly to why of suffering, God asked a series of questions that exposed the limitation of human understanding. Where were you when I cast the foundations of the earth? Job 38:4. This moment is one of the most impactful of the Bible. God does not try to convince Job with philosophical arguments or emotional comfort. It simply shows its greatness, describing creation, control over the universe, and the complexity of life. With this, God makes it clear that there are things far beyond our understanding. Just as a child does not understand all the decisions of parents, we also do not have the ability to see all God's purposes. Job, who once sought answers, is now facing something bigger. In a moment of humility and recognition, he says, I knew you just to hear, but now my eyes see you. Job 42:5. That is, your relationship with God has been transformed. He did not receive a detailed explanation for his suffering, but had a deep encounter with God. And that was enough to change your perspective. This scene teaches us a powerful lesson. We do not always have to understand everything, but we can trust who is in control. Suffering may lead us to question, but it can also approach God. And in Job's case, his story does not end in pain. Something even more extraordinary was coming. After all that has passed loss, pain, questions, and even unfair accusations, Job had his luck restored by God. But something curious happened before this turnaround. God commanded Job to pray for his friends, those who unfairly accused him. And he obeyed. This shows that the restoration of 28 Job was not only material, but also spiritual. Before he was doubled all he had lost, he had to demonstrate forgiveness and humility. God then blessed Job in an extraordinary way. Everything he had before was doubled back: goods, riches, and even a new family. But the most important thing was not what he received back, but the transformation he experienced. He began his journey as a righteous man, but ended up as someone who knew God much deeper. This teaches us that the true blessing is not only in what we have, but in the relationship we cultivate with God. Job's story also reminds us that trials do not last forever. Just as suffering came, he also ended. Many times when we are in the midst of difficulties, it seems that they will never end. But Job teaches us that God does not abandon us in the midst of the storm. The time of restoration comes, and when this happens, our faith is strengthened. Suffering can knock us down, but God always has the last word. This restoration does not mean that Job forgot his pain or that the losses were not real. But now he understood that God was in control all the time. Job's story challenges us to trust even when we don't have all the answers. So, can we have this same faith in difficult times? Life will not always be easy, but if Job has managed to remain firm, we can. Job's story is one of the deepest in the Bible because it teaches us something essential. True faith is not based solely on the blessings we receive, but in the unshakable trust in God, even when everything seems to crumble. Job went through the worst imaginable suffering. He lost everything he had and still maintained his integrity. Would we have this same force in the face of the trials of life? Many times, when we face difficulties, we ask ourselves why. But Job's story shows us that we do not always need the answers. We need to learn to trust. God did not explain to Job every detail of his suffering, but gave him something much greater: a real encounter with his presence. And that was enough to restore your faith. Now, think about your own life. How have you dealt with difficulties? Do you trust God only when everything goes well, or your faith resists storms? Job's journey challenges us to change our perspective on suffering and see that even in the most difficult times, God continues in control. If this story has impacted you, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and leave your like to receive more content like this. And don't forget, there's one more video waiting for you here on the screen right now. Until next time.